Stop acting like a coward, Brenda. It's just dirt. Tyler Keene said it at 6:10 a.m., standing on the east lip of a 12-foot trench with one polished boot close enough to the brake line that Brenda felt her jaw tighten. The floodlights were still on because dawn had not fully burned through the cloud deck, and the site looked flat and gray and deceptively calm, like a place where routine work should happen without argument. 12 hours later, that same cut would bury 2 pipe fitters, freeze a $48 million stormwater package, and drag everyone in management into depositions. At 6:10, though, it was just Tyler's voice, sharp in the damp morning air, and 40 people within earshot pretending not to hear him humiliate the one person actually reading what the ground was saying. Brenda Fletcher did not flinch, but the insult hit exactly where those insults were designed to hit. Not competence, not judgment, status. Tyler had learned that if he called a specialist coward in front of laborers, operators, and subcontractors, he could turn a safety stop into a social penalty. He did it with welders, riggers, concrete finishers. Now he was doing it with her, and he was doing it early enough that everyone's coffee was still warm and everyone's day still depended on his sign-off sheets. She kept her eyes on the trench, because the trench was the only thing in that moment that could not lie. The run was cut for a 36-inch reinforced storm line, straight shot down the south corridor toward the junction vault. Spoil piles sat too close, stacked like low berms, less than 2 feet from the edge. The excavator idled on the shoulder with the right track nearly overhanging the lip, engine droning at a steady needling rhythm that she could feel through her boots. Overnight rain had darkened the upper 5 feet of the sidewall, and pale sand seams streaked through brown, silty layers that had already started to unravel in thin rills. Hairline cracks ran parallel to the trench like pencil marks, 10 to 14 inches back from the edge. She had seen that exact pattern in Kansas, in Oklahoma, in western Missouri. Cracks like that were not decoration. They were a map. Tyler stepped closer and jabbed a finger toward the cut. We're 2 days behind on this segment. Corporate has the dashboard open. We dig, lay, and backfill today. No theater. Brenda finally looked at him. He was 40, clean, hard hat, clean vest, clean gloves. No mud on his knees, because he never climbed down where measurements happened. He liked words like throughput and cycle time and unit cost. He liked speaking in compressed slogans that made procedure sound like laziness. This is type C behavior, she said, keeping her tone level. No trench box, no hydraulic shoring, no benching. 12 feet deep with active seepage and surcharge at the lip. We do not put people in this cut. Tyler gave a dry laugh, loud enough for the nearby crew to register. There it is, the speech. The laborers loading pipe gaskets slowed down without stopping. The mini-loader operator pretended to adjust a mirror. Nate Rios, 6 months in and still carrying new gloves clipped to his vest, watched from beside the laser tripod with his chin tucked down, like he hoped invisibility was a learnable skill. Brenda heard her own pulse in her ears and hated that she could hear it. She had spent 14 years in excavation, utility placement, and confined dig zones, and she knew exactly what she was paid for, not heroics, not speed. Calls made early enough that people went home with their names still attached to tomorrow's shift list. She pointed to the nearest fissure with a gloved hand. That crack is a tension line. The wall is telegraphing a shear plane. Toe is already sloughing. Tyler looked at the fisher, then at her, and shrugged. You're seeing ghosts. I'm seeing mechanics. He angled his head, smile thinning. You're being lazy, Brenda. That one stirred a visible ripple in the crew. Coward could be dismissed as heat-of-the-moment management bark. Lazy was more deliberate. Lazy said she was protecting herself, not the crew. Lazy said she was billing time to stand around and lecture. Brenda inhaled through her nose and let the breath out slowly. If she snapped, Tyler would frame the whole thing as attitude conflict and cut the technical ground out from under her. She kept her words clipped and specific. I need a pocket penetrometer reading, visual manual soil check logged, and a protective system plan. That is not optional at this depth. Tyler folded his arms. Optional is exactly what it is when we're burning daylight. 45 minutes for your paperwork ritual costs this job 5 figures by end of week. 45 minutes is cheaper than an entrapment. He stepped into her space, lowering his voice, making it more intimate and therefore more threatening. Corporate asked me last night why this forewoman's productivity has fallen off. They use the word obsolete. You know what that means? Brenda felt heat rise under her collar despite the cold morning. Obsolete. He had lined up all 3 words now. Coward, lazy, obsolete. Not random, a sequence. Strip authority, assign motive, then declare replacement. She held his gaze. It means people in trailers are pretending ground conditions obey spreadsheets. For a second, Tyler's expression hardened enough that she thought he might shout again. Instead, he smiled in that thin, managerial way that carried no humor at all. Do your job or clear your badge. Around them, equipment kept running. Diesel hum. Reverse alarm beeps from the loader. A pump chattering as it pushed shallow water toward a temporary ditch. Industrial sites never went quiet for personal conflict, which was part of why bad decisions spread so efficiently. The machine noise made urgency feel normal. By 6:18 a.m., the superintendent's truck had pulled up near the Connex office, and a few people drifted toward the confrontation under the pretense of checking hall tickets. Tyler knew he had an audience now. An audience meant performance. He raised his voice again. Listen up, he called, turning half toward the crew while keeping Brenda in his peripheral vision. We are not shutting this line down because someone's nervous about damp soil. This is controlled excavation. We proceed. Brenda stepped forward before the call could calcify into obedience. You want controlled excavation, then control it. Pull spoil back 2 feet minimum. Move the excavator off the shoulder. Install a trench box rated for this class, and verify sidewall condition after dewatering. Then proceed. Tyler answered without looking at her. You're not in charge of schedule? I'm in charge of whether this cut is survivable. That landed harder than she expected. A few heads turned fully toward her now. One of the older pipe fitters, Darnell, shifted his weight and stared into the trench, then back to the crack line she had pointed out. He did not say anything, but he stepped away for the ladder access and rested his shovel against a pallet. Small movement, big message. Tyler saw it too. He pivoted back to Brenda. You're poisoning the crew. No, she said. I'm naming the hazard. He pulled a folded daily plan from his clipboard, tapped it with one finger, and spoke like he was reading policy. Today's objective, 60 linear feet, bedding complete, first joint set by 9. We already lost yesterday to rain. We are not losing this morning to fear. Brenda looked at the paper, then at the trench wall, where Damp grains were trickling in tiny streams from a mid-height seam, almost delicate, almost easy to dismiss. The danger in earthwork was often that it looked gradual right up until it was sudden. There was no dramatic warning siren when soil structure let go. No spark, no flash. Just accumulated conditions crossing a threshold. She reached to her vest pocket, pulled out her phone and photographed the east wall, then the spoil pile distance, then the excavator track location, then Tyler's unsigned soil log clipboard visible in frame. She made each shot intentional and wide enough to include reference points, timestamp, geotag, context. Tyler barked a laugh. "What is this now, documentary hour?" "Record keeping," she said. He tilted his head. "You think pictures protect you from insubordination?" "Pictures protect the truth when memory gets edited." For the first time that morning, his composure slipped. "Careful." Brenda did not answer immediately. She could feel every pair of eyes measuring what came next, not because they cared about hierarchy theater, but because they cared about rent, health insurance, and whether saying no would get a person blacklisted across 3 counties. She chose her words so there was no room to reinterpret them later. "I will not authorize entry into an unprotected 12-foot trench in unstable, wet Type C conditions. That is my position." Timestamp 6:23. Nate looked down at his boots. Darnell exhaled through pursed lips. Someone at the pump muttered, "She's right," too softly for Tyler to challenge without admitting he had heard it. Tyler set his clipboard against his chest like a shield. "You're done on this line, until I decide otherwise." Brenda nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement of the move. He was trying to turn a hazard objection into a disciplinary issue, because disciplinary issues moved faster through company channels than engineering corrections. That was the oldest trick in field management under pressure. Reframe physics as personality. At 6:27 a.m., the first pale strip of sunlight cut under the clouds and lit the trench wall from the west. The new angle made the cracks stand out clearer, longer, more connected, each one tracing the edge of a mass that wanted to move. Brenda watched Tyler follow her gaze for half a second, then look away as if seeing it would force him to admit what it meant. He lifted his radio to his mouth and said, "Command to all crews. Maintain production targets. Excavation continues." Brenda felt the insult settle into something colder than anger. Coward, lazy, obsolete. Had done their work in the open. Now procedure would have to do its work on paper, on radio, in every place where facts could still be pinned down before someone got trapped under a decision dressed up as confidence. She opened the safety app, started a stop work entry, and typed the first line exactly as she had spoken it. Unprotected 12-foot trench, wet Type C behavior, visible tension cracking, immediate collapse potential. She hit submit on the preliminary line, watched the spinning icon lock for 2 seconds, then expanded the report window and started attaching evidence in sequence. East wall photo, west wall photo, spoil setback, excavator track overhang, groundwater sheen at the toe. The app required a hazard code, and she selected EX4, potential trench wall instability with active moisture migration. A second menu asked whether workers were currently exposed. She marked yes, surface crew within 1 collapse zone, because the access ladder was still standing in the trench, and Tyler had not cleared the perimeter. At 6:28 a.m., she stepped to the tailgate of her pickup, opened her field case, and pulled out the pocket penetrometer, moisture tins, and folding trowel she used for spot checks. The penetrometer was a simple spring instrument, but in her trade, it was a truth machine. Push the calibrated piston into undisturbed soil, and it gave unconfined compressive strength in tons per square foot. Stronger clays held shape. Weak, saturated granular mixes read low and failed fast. She was not collecting a formal geotech profile there at the edge, but she could establish whether the supervisor's just dirt claim had any contact with reality. Darnell drifted over, keeping his voice low. "You want a witness?" "Yes," she said. "Stay where your boots are dry and watch the sample points." He nodded once, arms folded, eyes on the wall. She walked to the spoil pile where the excavator bucket had dropped a fresh cut an hour earlier, sliced a block with the trowel, and tried a ribbon test in her glove. The material broke apart before it could hold shape past her thumb. High sand fraction, low cohesion, water-lubricated grains. She pressed the penetrometer into the sample and read the dial. 0.55 TSF. She repeated from a second clod with darker moisture staining. 0.48 TSF. Type C by behavior and strength. No debate. She photographed the gauge face each time and called out values so Darnell could hear. Point A, 0.55. Point B, 0.48. He whistled once through his teeth. "That's soup." "That's collapse-prone," she corrected, because language mattered in documents. "Soup sounds casual." Back at the trench edge, she crouched and extended the trowel handle toward the crown crack she had flagged earlier. The gap had widened enough to swallow the steel tip. 10 minutes ago it had been hairline. Now she could trace it 3 feet farther toward the spoil berm, with smaller branch fractures stepping off at angles like fishbone. Tension crack propagation meant the soil mass behind the wall had already separated from stable ground. It was no longer a wall in the way people imagined walls. It was a slab waiting for a trigger. The excavator continued idling at shoulder level, right track inches from the brake line. Engine harmonics came up through the soles of her boots in a steady, low buzz at around 20 hertz, the exact kind of persistent vibration that walked granular particles toward failure. The operator, Miguel, looked down from the cab with both hands off the controls in a silent question. "Do I shut down?" She gave a firm palm-down signal for idle hold and pointed to the track, then to the setback marks stenciled on the trench card, zip-tied to the fence. He understood. He did not move the machine, but he did not slew the house either. At 6:32 a.m., she moved to the west side and got her first look at tow behavior without shadow. Damp sand had started trickling from a seam at mid-height, making thin conical piles at the base. More troubling, the base itself was bulging in 2 sections, subtle outward bowing where lateral pressure was redistributing. People called it wall breathing. She hated the term because it sounded organic and manageable. Mechanically, it was loss of internal friction along a developing failure surface. Nate approached with the laser rod tucked under his arm, trying to keep his tone neutral. "Tyler wants grade check in 10. Brenda kept her eyes on the wall. "You're not going down there." He shifted his grip. "He said delay goes on my file if I stall." She pointed to the damp seam. "That seam is feeding fines. See the little fan pile at the toe? That material used to lock grain to grain. Now water is carrying it out. When that support goes, the slab above drops. Not maybe. When?" Nate looked where she pointed. "It's just a little spill." "It starts little." Failure always starts little, then it runs. She stood, took the rod from his hand and placed it on the ground away from the access ladder. Listen to me carefully. Vertical cut at 12 feet, no shield, no shoring, surcharge at crown, active seepage, vibration load on the shoulder. That is 4 independent collapse drivers. You only need 1. He swallowed and glanced toward Tyler, who was near the Connex office speaking into his radio with clipped theatrical gestures. If I refuse, I'm done. If you comply and the wall lets go, you might be done in a different way. Nate stared at the trench, jaw tight, and said nothing. By 6:35 a.m., the cloud cover thinned enough that the laser receiver mounted on the benchmark stake began blinking clearly from 30 feet away. Brenda noticed the indicator pulsing red instead of steady green. She walked over, checked line of sight, and reset the mast level. Red again, with a 0.3-foot deviation, where there had been 0 at dawn setup. She looked at the stake. The soil around it had settled half an inch toward the trench, a tiny crescent depression opening on the trench side. Ground movement had reached the benchmark zone. She called Darnell over and tapped the receiver. This is no longer a wall-only issue. Shoulder is translating. He leaned in. You trust the unit? I trust repeated red plus visible settlement. She photographed the receiver screen, then the stake base with a ruler for scale. EX4 report, attachments 7 and 8. Tyler's voice cut across the machine noise. Brenda, stop staging a science fair and clear the lane. She turned, kept her tone flat. Laser benchmark, shifted 3/10. Crown crack growth from hairline to tool width in under 10 minutes. Penetrometer under 0.6 TSF. Active toe sloughing both walls. He waved one hand dismissively without walking closer. You can make any number sound scary if you say it slow. Numbers are already scary. Not to people who work. The line got a few strained laughs from 2 subcontract laborers who were watching him, not the trench. Brenda did not answer him. She opened the app again and added a short entry. Supervisor verbally dismissed measured shoulder movement and low-strength readings, instructed continuation. At 6:38 a.m., she heard a new sound under the excavator idle, a dry granular hiss that rose and fell in uneven pulses. She followed it to the east wall. Fine sand was now streaming from 2 pinholes about chest height, not trickling, streaming, like someone had opened tiny valves in the cut face. Piping, water pressure, had found pathways through the matrix and was transporting fines out of the wall body, hollowing internal support where nobody could see it. She knelt and pressed the back of her glove against the flow. Cool water. Continuous. She held it there for 3 seconds, lifted away, and watched the holes widen just a fraction. She did not need a geologist on scene to call that what it was. Loss of material, loss of density, loss of stand-up time. Darnell, she said, not raising her voice, mark this point with paint. He grabbed the inverted can from a crate and ringed both pinholes with orange circles. The paint bled in the wet surface, turning ragged at the edges. Miguel climbed down from the excavator cab and walked over, helmet chin strap swinging. I can back her off right now if you want. I do want, Brenda said, and you should. But Tyler gave production hold. Miguel looked toward Tyler and shook his head. He wants me parked for quick swing to bedding. Says moving out costs 6 minutes. 6 minutes now or 6 months later, Darnell muttered. Brenda kept working the evidence chain. Miguel, state on camera what you just told me. He frowned, then nodded. She hit record. He repeated, concise and careful. Supervisor instruction to keep excavator at trench shoulder for cycle time. No relocation despite instability concerns. She saved the clip, attached it, and tagged witness confirmation pending. At 6:41 a.m., she finally got a call back from the Regional Safety Coordinator, Elena Park, through the app's audio link. Elena's voice came thin over the speaker because the signal at the South Corridor was unreliable. Brenda, I'm reading your stop work entry. Confirm depth and protective system status. Depth 12 feet, measured at station 14 plus 20, Brenda said. No trench box in place, no shoring, vertical walls in wet type C behavior, active seepage and piping, crown crack propagation ongoing, benchmark movement 3/10 on receiver. Elena did not pause. Any personnel in the cut right now? Not at this second. Keep it that way. I'm issuing remote hold recommendation and notifying project safety officer. From 20 yards away, Tyler watched Brenda on the call and made a slicing motion at his throat, a gesture meant for her alone. She ignored it and continued. Elena, add this. Excavator remains at lip per supervisor instruction. Spoil pile setback non-compliant. Logged, Elena said. I need live photos every 5 minutes until I can get on site or authorize local shutdown through superintendent. Copy. The call ended. Brenda exhaled once, then returned to the wall. The fresh orange paint rings around the piping points had elongated downward, where material had already washed out. She could now fit a finger into one of the cavities up to the first knuckle. She did not do it. She just photographed and measured. A laborer named Quinn approached carrying 2 trench panels still strapped on a flatbed, hopeful and irritated in equal parts. Where do you want these staged? Relief cut through Brenda's tension for half a second. Set them by access point north side. Keep forklift back from crown. Quinn nodded and radioed his driver. The forklift rolled forward, then stopped abruptly when Tyler stepped in front of it and pointed away from the trench with both arms. Quinn looked at Brenda, confused. Tyler shouted across the lane. No box install until line and grade verification. We are not burning an hour for unnecessary steel. Brenda answered loudly enough for the nearest crews to hear, but kept her phrasing procedural. Protective system is required before entry at this depth and soil condition. Tyler turned his back on her and spoke into his radio. All hands. Maintain tasks per sequence plan. The forklift reversed, carrying the panels away. Brenda watched the steel disappear behind stacked pipe and felt the sight tilt from risk to countdown. She updated the stop work entry in real time. Trench panels arrived and were redirected by supervisor. Protective installation delayed, contrary to hazard conditions. Attachment 12. Video with timestamp 6:45. By 6:47 a.m., the east wall crown crack had linked with a secondary fracture near the spoil toe, creating a continuous arc almost 12 feet long. The geometry was unmistakable, a detached wedge line. She walked it with a tape, called out distances, and Darnell wrote them on the back of a delivery ticket when his marker ran dry on his notebook. Near the midpoint, the surface settled again with a soft, almost polite crunch under her boot, less than a quarter inch but fresh and sharp-edged. No rounding from traffic. Recent movement. She straightened and scanned the trench one more time end to end. Vertical faces gleaming damp. Ladder rungs slick with mud. Laser tripod still standing where Nate had left it. Excavator track still too close. Spoil piles still loading the crown. Every indicator aligned with one conclusion. and none of them cared about Tyler's dashboard metrics. When she raised her radio, her thumb hovered for a fraction over transmit, not because she doubted the call, but because she understood exactly what it would trigger in the chain above her. Then she pressed and spoke each word as if she were reading a standard into steel. Field safety to all crews in South Corridor. Technical alarm confirmed. Active wall instability, shoulder movement, and material loss at trench face. No personnel are to enter the excavation until engineered protection is installed and soil status is reclassified on record. Her radio call was still crackling through the channel when Tyler started walking toward her from the Connex lane. Fast, shoulders squared, clipboard tucked against his side like a weapon he intended to use in public. Crew members did what crews always did when a supervisor and a forewoman were about to collide. They kept their hands moving, slowed just enough to listen, and took one step farther from the blast radius of blame. Brenda stayed on the east lip, boots planted outside the crack arc she had measured, phone in her left hand, with the stopwork file open and recording. Tyler stopped 3 feet from her and pointed at the radio clipped to her vest. Counterman that transmission right now. She did not lower her eyes. No, do not test me on my own corridor. This is not your corridor when the wall is piping out fines, she said. This is a collapse zone. He leaned in, voice flat and dangerous. I gave a production order. You gave a panic speech. Fix it. Brenda kept her tone at field brief volume, loud enough for witnesses, calm enough for transcript. I issued a hazard control notice based on measured conditions. 12-foot vertical cut, wet type C behavior, crown crack linkage, toe sloughing, shoulder settlement, vibration surcharge. Entry is suspended. Tyler laughed once, short and contemptuous. You memorized some buzzwords and now you think you run the job. She lifted the phone so his face and the trench wall shared the frame. Not buzzwords. Mechanism. Water starts carrying fine particles out of the face. That reduces density. Reduced density drops friction angle. Lower friction means the soil mass can't self-support at this slope. Add surcharge and machine vibration at the crown, and the detached wedge releases. He turned his head toward the nearest laborers. Hear that? She's giving a lecture again. Darnell did not smile. Quinn did not smile. Miguel stood near the excavator track with his arms folded, expression unreadable under his hard hat. Brenda pointed to the orange rings around the seep holes. Those cavities were pinholes at 638. They've widened every minute. That's active material loss. Tyler snapped. It's wet dirt. It is wet granular fill with low cohesion under load. He jabbed a finger toward the ladder. You are creating delay on a line we are already behind on. Every hour costs this site money. She nodded once. And every cubic yard that moves wrong costs people air. For a second, his expression hardened into open fury. Then he shifted tactics and went formal, the way managers did when they wanted retaliation to look like policy. He opened his clipboard, uncapped his pen, and spoke as if dictating minutes. 6:49 a.m. Forewoman Brenda Fletcher refuses direct supervisory instruction to proceed with trench operations. Brenda answered immediately. 6:49 a.m. Forewoman Brenda Fletcher refuses unlawful entry into unprotected excavation under observed instability indicators. He wrote while glaring at her. Insubordination. Hazard abatement. Obstruction. Compliance. Tyler clicked his pen shut so hard it was audible over the diesel hum. You think word games will save you? She held up the penetrometer photo on her screen. Readings under 0.6 TSF in saturated material at the cut. That classifies protective requirements. This is not discretionary. He stepped to the edge and kicked a clump of damp soil into the trench, as if demonstration by boot could replace procedure by standard. The clump broke apart halfway down and scattered against the wall. He turned back with a tight smile. Still standing. Brenda did not move. Slope failures are progressive. A wall can stand until it doesn't. That is why standards are preventive, not reactive. At 6:50 a.m., her radio chirped, and Elena's voice came through, compressed by static. Field safety status check. Brenda keyed up without looking away from Tyler. Instability indicators worsening. Supervisor is ordering continuation. Tyler reached for Brenda's radio and she took one clean step back, keeping distance and camera line. His hand stopped midair. Two operators turned fully toward them now. He lowered his arm and smiled at them as if nothing had happened. "Give me that channel," he said to Brenda through his teeth. She transmitted to Elena anyway. "Please log attempted interference with active safety communication at 6:50. Elena's reply was immediate. "Logged. Maintain no entry instruction. I am escalating to Project Safety Officer and Municipal Liaison." Tyler barked a laugh. "Municipal Liaison? For this?" Brenda clipped the radio back onto her vest and answered him instead of the channel. "Permit conditions require protective system documentation at this depth. You waived the soil log. That is already discoverable." He froze a fraction at the word discoverable. Then he recovered and pointed at her phone. "Put that away." "No. I am directing you to stop recording personnel. I am documenting hazard controls and supervisory instructions on an active stop work file." He took one step closer. Last warning. She heard the excavator idle, the rattle of chain on a pipe bundle, the hiss from the seep holes, and the quiet spreading through the nearest crews as they understood this was no longer an argument about interpretation. It was a test of who could force the next action. She kept her voice even. "Tyler, pull the excavator back beyond the setback line. Relocate spoil at least 2 feet from crown. Stage trench box at north access. We can reevaluate sidewall behavior after dewatering and reclassification. That is the fastest safe path." He shook his head slowly. "You still think this is negotiation? It's sequence. It's defiance." She pointed to the benchmark stake and the red laser receiver light. "It's movement shoulder translated 3/10 already." He looked at the receiver, then deliberately looked away from it. "Your instrument is off." Then verify it with the second receiver. "We are done with your tests." Brenda inhaled through her nose, steadied her hands, and made the refusal explicit one more time, each clause clean enough to survive a courtroom replay. "I will not authorize or perform entry operations in this trench under current conditions. I will not assign crew to line, grade, bedding, or pipe set until engineered protective measures are installed." Tyler stared at her for a long beat, then pivoted toward the whole lane and raised his radio. "All crews maintain sequence. Forewoman Fletcher is relieved of trench authority pending review." No one moved toward the ladder. He repeated louder, anger bleeding through the words. "That is a direct order. Proceed." Miguel called from beside the excavator, voice controlled. Proceed with what system, Tyler? There's no box in. Tyler wheeled on him. You run iron, not policy. Miguel shrugged once. Iron runs where ground lets it run. Brenda logged that exchange in her app as Witness Statement 13. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat now, not from uncertainty, but from the effort of staying procedural while pressure turned personal. She looked back at the east wall. A thin strip near mid-height had started to peel in damp grains the width of a hand. Not a collapse, just a continuous dribble that hadn't been there 5 minutes earlier. By 6:53 a.m., sunlight had broken fully through a tear in the cloud cover, and the crack geometry along the crown showed in hard relief. The main arc had a new branch extending toward where the excavator's right track sat. Brenda took another photo with the tape measure visible and uploaded it. She added one line. Crack propagation now intersects machine influence zone. Tyler saw her typing and snapped. You're done writing fiction. Turn in your badge. She looked up slowly. You can take my badge. You don't get my authorization. He smiled without warmth. Watch me. He keyed his radio. Main office, this is Keene. Initiate field reassignment on Fletcher for refusal to execute assigned scope. Static, then the dispatcher answered, uncertain. Copy reassignment request. Need superintendent concurrence. Get it? Brenda keyed her own channel to Elena. Supervisor initiating disciplinary action in response to stop work. Elena came back after a short pause. Do not surrender evidence chain. Keep transmitting conditions every 5 minutes. Tyler heard that and snapped. You are not under Elena. You are under me. Brenda answered with the same sentence she used in training rooms when apprentices asked where authority ended. In a collapse hazard procedure outranks personalities. He let out a tight breath and changed tactics again, dropping volume to a near whisper that forced her to lean slightly to hear him. You're making this ugly for no reason. Retract the no entry call. Say we're evaluating. I'll put a note in your file and we move on. Not happening. You want to die on this hill? This is not a hill. It's a trench with an active shear plane. His jaw flexed. You always need to be the smartest person in the lane. I need people breathing at shift end. He stepped back, radio already in hand, and made the move she had expected since dawn. Nate front and center. Nate looked up from where he had been standing near the laser tripod, eyes wide, then walked over with that careful half-hesitation of someone who knew he was being called into a test he did not want. Tyler put a hand on his shoulder and kept his voice loud, performative, carrying to every corner of the South Corridor. Nate Rios, you are acting trench lead for this run effective now. Nate swallowed. I'm not certified forewoman level. You are certified enough to hold a rod and follow grade. Brenda stepped in before the command chain sealed. Nate, listen to me. This wall is losing structure through piping and surcharge loading. If you go down there, you're standing under a detached mass. Tyler cut across her. Do not coach my crew against orders. She ignored him and kept her eyes on Nate. You saw the seep holes. You saw the crack growth. You saw the red receiver. Nate's voice was low. I saw it. Tyler squeezed his shoulder harder. And you also saw the schedule board. We're already red. You want your name on a do not rehire list over mud? Brenda felt a cold anger settle in her chest at how neatly he framed coercion as opportunity. He is 6 months in, Tyler. You are using him as insulation. Tyler turned on her. I am using available labor because my forewoman quit on task. I refused an unsafe task. You refused your job. She keyed her radio again. Safety channel. Note potential coercive reassignment of junior worker to identified collapse zone at 6:56. Elena answered, voice tighter now. Logged. Superintendent notified. We are pushing immediate stand-down instruction. Tyler pointed at Brenda's chest. One more transmission and you're off site. She met his stare. You already said that. He laughed, short and humorless, then looked at Nate. Harness on, grab the laser rod down the ladder. Quick check, 2 minutes. There is no overhead protection and no shielding, Brenda said. Tyler fired back. There is no collapse. As if contradicting him on cue, a narrow ribbon of damp sand spilled from the west wall seam and hissed onto the trench floor in a continuous line. Darnell took one involuntary step backward. Miguel looked at Brenda, then at Tyler, and said quietly, That's an active run-out. Tyler barked. Nobody asked. He turned to Quinn. Bring the pipe sling to Station 14. We set first joint now. Quinn hesitated. With Nate in the cut? With whoever follows orders. Brenda moved to stand between Nate and the ladder, not touching him, just occupying the path. You do not have to do this. Tyler's face flushed. Move. No. Move, Brenda. No. For 2 beats, nobody spoke. The only sounds were the excavator engine, the ticking ping of cooling metal from a parked compactor, and that steady granular hiss from the seat points. Then Tyler keyed his radio and set it where everyone could hear. Security to South Corridor. Remove forewoman Fletcher for insubordination and interference with operations. He lowered the radio and pointed past her at the ladder. Nate, go. Nate stood frozen with the rod in his hand, eyes flicking from Brenda to the trench to Tyler, while the crack at the crown lengthened by another few inches and the ground gave a faint, settling crunch under the edge stakes. Tyler did not wait for courage to appear in him. He reached over, grabbed the rod near the receiver, and shoved it back into Nate's palms. Down the ladder, he said. 2-minute grade shot. We move pipe. Now. Nate's mouth worked once before sound came out. If the wall moves, I'm out. Tyler gave him a thin smile. The wall is not moving. Brenda is. Brenda kept herself between Nate and the ladder for 1 more second. Look at the orange marks. You saw those holes widen. You go below that seam and you're under a loaded shelf. Tyler barked toward Quinn without taking his eyes off her. Get her out of the path. Quinn didn't move. Neither did Darnell. The lane held for a beat, in a strange, brittle stillness, every worker calculating the same equation. Follow the supervisor and risk the trench, or back the forewoman and risk a paycheck. Then Tyler played the only card he still believed worked. He raised his radio and spoke to the whole corridor. Any crew member refusing assigned task is off this project by lunch. That includes subcontract labor. That threat broke the pause. Nate swallowed, stepped around Brenda's shoulder, and went to the ladder with mechanical, reluctant movements. One boot, then the other on mud-slick rungs. Brenda moved with him to the lip, close enough to grab his vest if he slipped, far enough back to stay outside the crack arc she had measured. She keyed her radio with her free hand. Safety channel. Entry initiated against no entry instruction at 6:57. 1 worker descending unprotected 12-foot cut. Elena's reply came through static and compression. Copy. Stand by for Superintendent Hardstop. Tyler heard it and snapped. No one is standing by. Miguel, boom over Station 14. Keep it light on the stick. Miguel stayed where he was for half a second, then climbed back into the cab, because refusal in that seat was public and immediate. The excavator tone rose as he brought hydraulic pressure up. Not a hard rev, just enough to wake the machine. Brenda felt the added vibration through the soles of her boots and turned to Tyler. "You're stacking dynamic load on a detached crown. I'm setting pipe on grade. You're shaking the failure plane." He dismissed her with a flick of his hand and looked down at Nate. "Call elevation." At 6:58 a.m., Nate reached the trench floor, boots sinking a fraction into wet bedding sand. He looked smaller from above than Brenda expected, swallowed by vertical walls that were no longer clean cuts, but patchworks of dark damp zones, pale streaks, and flaking edges. He raised the rod and called up, voice strained. "Rod set at station 14 plus 20, center line." Tyler cupped his ear theatrically. "Louder." Nate repeated the call. Tyler nodded to the tripod where the laser receiver still flashed intermittent red. "Take west side." Brenda stepped toward the tripod and put a hand on it. "No, he gets one reading and exits." Tyler pointed at her hand. "Take it off." She left it there. "He exits." Darnell moved in closer to Brenda without speaking, and Quinn mirrored him on the other side, a quiet brace line of two workers whose faces were drawn tight with dread. Tyler saw the alignment and his expression sharpened. "Fine," he said. "One reading, then we set joint." He turned to Nate and shouted down, "West side, quick." Nate crossed 3 paces through slick mud and lifted the rod near the west wall where damp sand had been running in a thin ribbon for 15 minutes. The seat points Brenda had circled were no longer pinholes. Each had a ragged mouth now, water tracing narrow channels down the face. Mid-height, a shallow bulge pushed outward like fabric from behind. Brenda felt the cadence of the site changing in ways most people missed. The excavator hydraulic whine overlaid the engine idle. A pump coughed, then steadied. Fine grains hissed against the trench floor in intermittent pulses. The wall was talking in tiny sounds, and every sound said the same thing. Support was leaving faster than anyone was replacing it. By 6:59 a.m., security had not arrived. Superintendent had not arrived. And the only authority physically present at the lip was the one choosing speed over stability. Tyler paced 3 steps, checked his watch, then pointed to Quinn. "Bring the first joint sling to the edge." Quinn hesitated. "Nate's still down." "Then move faster so he won't be." Quinn looked at Brenda. She answered before he could decide. "Do not stage load over occupied trench." Tyler rounded on her. "You are relieved. Stop issuing commands." She met him squarely. "I am issuing hazard controls." He took 1 step closer, lowered his voice, and tried a different pressure. "You can still walk this back. Say we had a misunderstanding. Say you overcalled it." Brenda shook her head once. The ground already made the call. A dry crackle sounded from the east crown, not loud, more like stiff paper crumpling under a hand. Several heads turned at once. Brenda dropped to a knee, sighted along the crack line, and saw what she had feared. The primary arc had opened another 1/4 inch near the excavator track and linked into a second branch toward the spoil toe, creating a broad detached plate above Nate's position. She stood and shouted, "Nate, ladder now!" Tyler shouted at the same time, "Hold position." Nate froze, rod still upright, eyes up, body split by 2 opposite orders. Brenda keyed her radio hard enough her thumb hurt. "Emergency advisory, active crown separation, worker in cut. Repeat, active crown separation." Elena's voice came back, clipped and urgent. "Evacuate immediately. I'm declaring stand down." Brenda did not wait for Tyler. "Nate, drop the rod and climb." Nate let the rod fall. It hit the trench floor with a dull metallic clank and rolled toward the wall. He turned and moved toward the ladder, boots slipping in slurry. Above him, Miguel had the bucket curled and hovering, trying not to transmit additional vibration while still obeying Tyler's last command. The machine's right track sat where it had sat all morning. Too close, too heavy, too late. At 7 a.m., the low granular groan began. It came from beneath the surface, a deep, muffled sound like a truck crossing a bridge in fog, and every experienced person on that edge recognized it at once. Darnell cursed under his breath and stepped back. Quinn dropped the sling and reached for the nearest shovel by reflex. Miguel yanked the throttle to idle and locked his controls. Tyler looked down into the trench, and for the first time that morning, uncertainty crossed his face. Brenda did not hesitate. She keyed the radio and shouted, "Evacuate now! Evacuate now! Clear the edge!" Nate was 3 rungs up when the first section of east wall feathered downward in a sheet of damp grains. 8 seconds after her call, the top edge slumped 6 inches, then a foot, then held for a heartbeat, as if the soil might stop itself. It did not. The detached slab rotated and dropped in a broad curtain, striking the trench floor with a blunt, heavy roar that swallowed every other sound. "Move!" Brenda yelled, grabbing Darnell's vest and dragging him 2 steps back from the lip. 3 seconds later, the west wall released in sequence. The second failure hit harder because the first had undercut the floor support. Both side walls came in like stage curtains torn from rails, fast and almost silent in the initial fall, then thunderous on impact. Wet soil surged across the bottom of the trench in a dense wave that slammed into the ladder, snapped it sideways, and buried it under churning earth. Nate's hard hat flashed once in the dust cloud and vanished. The excavator lurched as the shoulder gave under its right track. Miguel jammed both boots into the cab floor and pulled the house away from the trench, while the edge slumped beneath him. The bucket jerked, teeth scraping air where solid ground had been a second earlier. The machine rocked, settled, and held with half the track hanging over fresh void. Dust and moisture billowed up together, a brown-gray plume with the smell of wet clay, diesel, and torn roots. Visibility dropped to a few yards. People shouted names through masks and sleeves. Someone screamed for a medic. Someone else yelled, "Head count, head count." Tyler stood at the lip, stunned, radio hanging at his side. Brenda shoved past him and took command, because the trench did not care who had won the argument. "All non-essential personnel back 20 feet. Engines off in the collapse zone. No one climbs in. Quinn Darnell, shovels only at this corner. Miguel, stabilize that machine and kill hydraulics." Tyler found his voice. "Get in there and dig them out." She snapped back without looking at him. "Unprotected secondary collapse risk. We dig from the shoulders until panels arrive. Call trench rescue now." Darnell was already on his knees, throwing soil with short, fast strokes from the nearest edge where Nate had been climbing. Quinn joined him and Brenda dropped beside them, scraping with her shovel in controlled cuts to avoid loading more weight onto any trapped chest cavity. Every scoop felt like trying to empty a river with a cup. Wet soil slumped back into the hole as quickly as they moved it. At 7:02 a.m., she found the top of a hard hat under 8 inches of fresh material and cleared around it with gloved hands. It was Nate. His face was caked with mud, eyes squeezed shut, mouth blocked by grit. Brenda rolled his head enough to clear an airway, swept his mouth, and shouted, "Nate, stay with me. Do not fight the soil." He coughed once, a wet, choking sound, then gasped. Relief hit her like impact. "We've got one breathing," she yelled. "Board and straps here now." Two laborers slid a backboard to the edge. They worked him free in inches, exposing shoulders, then torso pinned at the hips by compacted fill. Nate cried out when they shifted material near his waist, a raw sound that told Brenda more than any monitor. Pelvic injury likely, crush load duration unknown. "Stop pulling," she ordered. "Dig lower, relieve pressure first." Tyler knelt opposite her, hands shaking as he scraped with no technique, throwing dirt into the same hole they were trying to clear. Brenda caught his wrist and shoved his hand away. "You're collapsing our pocket. Follow direction or get out." He stared at her, then backed off one pace, breathing hard. At 7:04 a.m., the first siren rose in the distance, thin at first, then building as rescue units turned into the South Access Road. Brenda kept working, counting breaths with Nate, keeping his head supported while Darnell and Quinn carved a narrow relief trench around his hips. The soil was dense and sticky now, water binding fines into weight that clung to gloves, shovel blades, everything. "Where's Marco?" Quinn shouted suddenly. The question hit like another collapse. Marco Ledesma had been staging gaskets near the ladder minutes earlier. Brenda scanned the debris field, saw no helmet, no vest, no movement beyond the zone where the east curtain had landed deepest. She keyed her radio. Possible second buried worker, likely east sector near original ladder base. Mark last seen 6:59 at Station 14 plus 22. Rescue truck doors slammed. A captain in orange technical gear ran up with two technicians carrying trench panels and pneumatic shores. "Who's incident lead?" Brenda stood, mud to her elbows, and answered at once. Brenda Fletcher, forewoman. 2 victims. One partially extricated, breathing, suspected pelvic crush. One missing, likely full burial, east sector. Sidewalls failed both sides at 7 o'clock with active seepage and shoulder translation prior to event. Secondary collapse risk high. The captain nodded once, took in the trench geometry, and started issuing orders with practiced speed. "Hot zone perimeter now. Panels here. Air monitoring. Medic team on victim 1. No one enters until shore set." They took over the technical rescue operation in disciplined layers. Panel placement, strut pressurization, spotters at both crowns, medic at Nate's head with oxygen and cervical support. Brenda stayed at the edge as sight witness and hazard guide, pointing out where piping had been worst, where the crown cracks had linked, where Marco had last stood. At 7:11 a.m., with the first bay shored, rescuers completed Nate's extrication and transferred him to the medic team. He gripped Brenda's glove once as they lifted him, then lost focus, breathing through a mask, still conscious but fading behind pain and shock. She squeezed back and stepped away so they could work. The second search took longer and felt endless even on the clock. Rescue technicians advanced 1 panel length at a time through compacted wet fill, probing and clearing by hand, where machines would have been faster but deadly. At 7:23 a.m., they located Marco beneath dense overburden near the snapped ladder section. They freed him, initiated airway and trauma protocol immediately, and moved him to the waiting unit with compressions and oxygen underway. Brenda stood in mud and dust with her radio still in her hand, listening to the clipped language of medics, the hiss of pneumatic shores, the distant thump of helicopter rotors staging for transfer. Tyler sat on an overturned bucket 10 feet away, hard hat off, staring at the collapsed trench as if it were a problem that had appeared from nowhere. Physics had answered in less than 30 seconds. The argument had lasted all morning. Gravity took over. Gravity took over, and the site kept moving anyway. The rescue captain's boots thudded past her toward the command board. Medics shouted medication doses over the rotor wash, and someone from traffic control dragged orange barriers across the south corridor entrance to freeze all inbound trucks. Brenda wiped mud from her radio with the edge of her glove and forced her breathing back into countable rhythm. Count the facts, she told herself. Facts stayed usable when people started rewriting the morning. At 7:26 a.m., Incident Command declared the trench a fatal potential confined rescue scene. At 7:28, the captain directed full work stoppage across every active zone tied to the Stormline package. Tyler rose from the overturned bucket as if the order might not include him. "We can keep North Cruise running," he said, voice hoarse but still trying for managerial control. "That segment is nowhere near this cut." The captain didn't look up from the board. "No. Entire project footprint stands down until regulators clear it. Move your people to muster and start headcount reconciliation." Tyler opened his mouth to argue, then shut it when a county deputy stepped beside the captain and started yellow taping the lane. Brenda watched that exchange with a cold clarity that felt nothing like relief. There was no victory in it. There was only a line where authority had finally shifted from schedule pressure to documented hazard law. At 7:34, paramedics loaded Nate into the second ambulance, pelvis stabilized and oxygen still running. He caught Brenda's sleeve as they rolled past. His voice was thin through the mask. "Did Marco make it out?" She held his gaze for one beat too long, then answered with the only honest sentence available in that minute. "They got him out. They're still working him." Nate nodded once and released her sleeve. The ambulance doors closed. Siren rose, and the unit pulled through mud ruts toward the gate. 2 minutes later, the trauma helicopter lifted from the temporary pad near the batch plant, carrying Marco with compressions ongoing. The downdraft flattened caution tape against rebar bundles and blew grit into everyone's eyes. By 7:42 a.m., the rescue phase had shifted to scene preservation. No one touched the failed walls except the technical team. No one moved the excavator with half its right track hanging over the slumped crown. Brenda stood with Darnell and Quinn at the muster point while the deputy called names from a printed roster. Each here landed with a rough, exhausted force. Each pause stretched long enough to hurt. When Marco's name came, the deputy marked his sheet without saying the word everyone was already carrying. At 8:03, the regional safety coordinator, Elena Park, arrived in a white pickup still speckled with highway dust. She walked straight to Brenda, took one look at the mud on her sleeves, and said quietly, "You stayed on record?" Brenda handed over her phone. Photos, video, app logs, timestamps, radio clips. Sequential. No gaps from 6:23 forward. Elena scanned the first entries while they stood beside stacked HDPE pipe. Her jaw tightened as she hit the 6:45 clip showing trench panels redirected away from the access point. "Good chain," she said. "Do not edit anything. Airplane mode, then we image this device. Tyler approached at an angle, hard hat back on, trying to recover posture. I need that phone as company property evidence. Elena turned before Brenda had to. You'll get a forensic copy after legal hold notice, not before. It's my site, Tyler said. The county deputy, still within earshot, answered for her. It's a regulated incident scene now. Step back, sir. Tyler stepped back. At 8:27 a.m., the first state excavation inspector arrived, followed by an occupational safety investigator carrying a hard case and a laser rangefinder. They did not ask for narratives first. They measured. Depth at failure station, 12 feet 1 inch. Wall angle at failure remnants, near vertical. Spoil setback, non-compliant at multiple points. Minimum observed, 1 foot 9 inches at the east crown. Excavator track center line to break edge. Inside required offset. Protective system in place at time of entry. None. Soil classification log for morning shift. Missing. Brenda listened as each measurement was read aloud and entered, each one another bolt in a chain she had already known was there. At 9:10, Elena set up a folding table as a temporary evidence desk under the awning of a service trailer. We do this clean, she told Brenda. One interview now for emergency chronology. Oh, one recorded statement this afternoon. One sworn statement when counsel schedules. Brenda nodded, hands finally shaking now that tasks were structured. I'll keep it mechanism first. Exactly, Elena said. Mechanism, observation, order, refusal, result. No adjectives you can't defend. The investigator started audio. State your name and role. Brenda Fletcher, trench and utility forewoman. Describe the first non-compliant indicator you observed today. Crown tension cracking parallel to trench edge in wet type C behavior with active seepage and surcharge at lip. Did you communicate a no entry instruction? Yes, radio transmission at 6:47 and repeated at 7 with evacuation order. Did supervisory personnel countermand that? Yes. The question stayed clinical, and that clinical tone was its own mercy. It gave Brenda a framework when images kept trying to intrude. Nate's helmet disappearing in dust, the snapped ladder, Tyler's hand pointing at the trench, like pointing could hold a wall up. At 10:16, the hospital called Incident Command. Marco Ledesma was pronounced dead from crush asphyxia after resuscitation efforts failed. The captain removed his helmet for 2 seconds before relaying the notice to the deputy in the project office. Nobody spoke for a long moment after the words were delivered. Quinn sat on a coil of silt fence, elbows on knees, staring at his gloves. Darnell walked to the far fence line and stayed there with his back to everyone until the wind shifted and brought him back. Brenda felt grief arrive as anger's heavier twin. She had warned, documented, escalated, repeated. None of that moved soil backward. None of that brought Marco's breath back. Elena stood beside her without speaking, then said, Your evidence may be the only reason this gets named correctly. Brenda nodded because she could not trust her voice yet. By 11:40 a.m., accounting started arriving in hard numbers. The project controls manager, face pale under fluorescent trailer light, spread a printout on the table for incident command and regulators. Immediate suspension cost is roughly $96,000 per day, including idle equipment, labor carry, traffic control, and subcontract standby. If we lose this corridor for a full quarter, direct schedule impact exceeds $11 million. The inspector didn't react to the total. Write the number down, he said. Then write the control you skipped to avoid 45 minutes. No one answered him. At 1:05 p.m., corporate counsel joined by speakerphone. The voice was calm, precise, and already defensive. All personnel are instructed to preserve records and avoid speculative statements. We will coordinate internal review. Elena cut in. External review is already underway. State investigators have seen control. Device preservation orders are active. Counsel paused. Understood. Has insurer been notified? The project controls manager answered, preliminary notice sent at 12:48 with fatality and major collapse classification. The legal voice sharpened a degree. Given alleged supervisory override of required protective measures, expect reservation of rights, possibly denial on willful misconduct exclusions. Brenda watched Tyler from across the trailer as that sentence landed. He looked down at the tabletop, like he was searching for a column he could still optimize. 3 days passed before the first formal insurer letter arrived, and it read exactly like Elena had predicted. Coverage was accepted for emergency response and limited stabilization under a reservation of rights. But key claim categories were denied pending final findings. Delay damages tied to non-compliant operations, replacement of damaged production schedule milestones, and portions of liability linked to documented willful override of trench protection requirements. The letter cited the same evidence chain Brenda had built in mud at dawn. Timestamps, radio logs, missing soil classification entry, and witness confirmations. By the second week after the collapse, the shutdown duration estimate hardened from rumor into schedule fact. 117 days. Engineers had to redesign temporary support sequencing, rebid specialty shoring crews, and submit a corrective action plan to both the city and state before any re-entry permit would be considered. Daily burn continued. Subcontractors filed standby claims. The municipal client issued a notice of default cure period tied to safety performance, and the project's bonding company requested board-level briefings every Friday until reopening. Nate survived surgery, but remained off work with pelvic fractures and compartment syndrome treatment, and his statement was taken from a hospital room with 2 investigators and a recorder balanced on a rolling meal tray. Brenda attended by phone at his request. His voice was quieter than it had been on site, stripped of bravado and fear both. I went down because I was told refusal meant termination, he said. Brenda told me not to enter. She said the wall was losing support. She was right. The recorder captured every word. At the 30-day mark, regulators issued preliminary penalties: trench protection violations, failure to classify and document soil conditions, inadequate spoil setback, failure to maintain safe equipment offset, and retaliatory conduct tied to safety reporting. Proposed fines totaled $1.4 million before adjudication. The company's internal report, drafted to soften liability, used phrases like communication breakdown and fast-changing field conditions until the state investigator compared it line by line to radio transcripts and replaced those phrases with predictable, preventable collapse under known unsafe conditions. Brenda sat in the back of the conference room when that corrected language was read aloud. Tyler was there with counsel, tie pulled tight enough to look like armor. He did not look at her. The board chair asked one question that cut through 3 hours of posturing. Did any competent person on scene identify the hazard before entry? Elena answered, yes. Forewoman Fletcher identified it repeatedly, documented it, and issued no entry directives. The chair turned to Tyler. Did you override her? Tyler's silence lasted 4 seconds. I instructed continuation. The chair wrote one line on his legal pad and closed it. By the time the quarter closed, direct losses were posted at $11.8 million, not counting civil settlements still in negotiation. Tyler was terminated for cause, referred for criminal review, and later charged with negligent manslaughter and records falsification, based on witness testimony and audit trails that could not be massaged into ambiguity. The company entered probation under a mandated trench safety retraining order that required third-party verification for every excavation over 5 feet for 2 years. None of those outcomes restored what the morning had taken, but each one mapped consequence to cause with the same blunt certainty as soil under load. Brenda drove past the South Corridor the day re-entry barriers finally came down. New shoring stacks sat where the old spoil berm had once crowded the edge. Setback lines were painted bright and measured twice. A laminated card at the gate listed non-negotiables in block letters: classify, protect, inspect, document, stop when conditions change. She parked for a minute without getting out, hands resting on the steering wheel, and read the list again until the words stopped blurring. 45 minutes had been the shortcut. 1 life, 1 shattered body, 117 days, and millions in losses had been the invoice. Physics had submitted it in full. She stayed parked at the gate until her phone vibrated against the steering column, and when she saw Elena's name, she answered on the first ring. "Tomorrow, 8:30, County Criminal Court," Elena said. Her voice carried paper rustle and office echo. "Bench trial is confirmed after the discovery conference, and the judge approved same-day sentencing if there's a finding. District attorney wants you in person for a foundation testimony on the evidence chain." Brenda looked once more at the laminated card by the gate, then started the truck. "I'll be there. Bring your field notebook, the original delivery ticket Darnell wrote on, and your penetrometer calibration log. We already have digital copies, but defense challenged authenticity. Notebook is in my lockbox. Ticket is sleeved. Calibration log is signed by the lab." Elena paused. "Good. One more loose end. Security dispatch logs came in." Brenda tightened her grip on the wheel. "From when Tyler called them?" "Yes. Call received at 6:56. Unit acknowledged. They were rerouted to a gate collision and never reached South Corridor before 7 o'clock. Brenda let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding for months. "So that thread is closed." "It is. Drive safe." The courtroom smelled like old wood polish and damp wool coats, and the fluorescent lights gave everyone the same washed-out color. Tyler sat at the defense table in a dark suit that still looked expensive, but the confidence he used to wear like a hard shell had thinned into something brittle. He did not turn when Brenda took her seat behind the prosecution rail with Elena, Nate's workers' comp counsel, and Marco Ledesma's brother Raul. At 8:42, the clerk called the case. At 8:45, the judge took the bench and looked down over bifocals with the patient severity Brenda had heard in job site arbitration. Except this room had real penalties attached. The prosecutor stood first, laid out the chain in plain sequence, and put up the exhibits on a monitor visible to the court. Exhibit 1. Stop work entry at 6:23, authored by Brenda Fletcher, hazard code EX4. Exhibit 2 through 9. Time-stamped photos of crown cracks, seepage, spoil setback, excavator offset, penetrometer readings below 0.6 tons per square foot, red laser receiver, benchmark settlement scale. Exhibit 10, audio clip of Elena Park's remote no-entry confirmation. Exhibit 11, video of Tyler redirecting trench panels away from access at 6:45. Exhibit 12, radio transcript ordering continuation and relief of trench authority at 6:53. Exhibit 13, emergency evacuation call at 7 o'clock, followed by collapse. When the prosecution moved the delivery ticket into evidence, Raul looked down at his hands and pressed his thumb against his wedding ring until his knuckle blanched. The ticket still carried mud staining near the corner and Darnell's block letters marking crack lengths. The judge studied it for a long moment before nodding. Defense counsel tried the same lane they had signaled in depositions: field ambiguity, weather volatility, human factors. Ground conditions can change rapidly, he said. My client acted under schedule pressure, but did not intend harm. The prosecutor answered without raising her voice. Intent is not the threshold for negligence at this level. Knowledge is. He had explicit warnings, measurements, witness confirmation, and direct safety instruction. He overrode all of it. Brenda was called at 9:26. She stood, swore, sat, and kept her answers mechanical, because mechanism had carried truth farther than emotion ever could. State your name and role. Brenda Fletcher, trench and utility forewoman, 14 years in excavation operations. Did you identify a collapse hazard before entry? Yes. Did you communicate that hazard directly to the defendant? Yes, repeatedly with specific mechanisms and controls. Did you issue no entry? Yes, by radio and app log. Did he countermand? Yes. On cross, defense counsel leaned in. Ms. Fletcher, you disliked Mr. Keene, correct? I disliked unsafe orders. Please answer yes or no. I did not base safety calls on personal preference. He shifted. Could your instrument readings have been erroneous? I took repeated readings with photo verification and witness presence. The state lab later validated the instrument calibration. Could the laser receiver have drifted? It was reset and rechecked. Settlement at the stake base was also visually measured with a ruler. Is it true you refused a direct order? Yes, because compliance would have put workers in a known collapse zone. No flourish, no speech, no tremor. Just yes, where yes belonged. After Brenda stepped down, Miguel testified that he had asked to back the excavator off and was told to keep position for cycle time. Quinn testified that trench panels were physically on site and redirected. Darnell testified that he heard Brenda call out values and saw the crack arc link toward the machine influence zone. Nate testified by recorded video from a rehab chair, voice steady and face older by a decade. I went down because I was threatened with termination. She told me not to enter. She was correct. Then came the evidence analyst who closed the defense's last technical door. She explained hash verification for the phone image, metadata integrity, and chain of custody signatures from Brenda's device to forensic copy to court exhibit. She confirmed that no timestamps were altered, no files edited, no gaps present from 6/23 through post-collapse rescue logging. The penetrometer photos matched calibration standards and scene soil sampling. The orange paint rings around seep points were visible in both field images and inspector photographs taken after stand down, proving active piping had been present before entry. By 1:12 p.m., arguments ended. The judge removed his glasses, folded his hands, and delivered findings in language so plain it felt heavier than any shouting Tyler had ever done on site. This was not a spontaneous ground event. It was a predictable, preventable collapse under known unsafe conditions. The defendant received direct warning from a qualified forewoman, ignored mandatory protective requirements, retaliated against safety reporting, and ordered continuation. One worker died. Another sustained life-altering injuries. The court finds the defendant guilty on negligent manslaughter and records falsification counts. Tyler's shoulders dropped a fraction, then again when the judge added sentencing terms: custodial time, supervised release, prohibition from safety-critical supervisory roles during probation, and mandatory participation in excavation safety instruction delivered under state oversight. Not symbolic training. Recorded attendance, tested competency, and public compliance reports. Raoul exhaled through his nose, slow and shaking. Elena touched Brenda's sleeve once, brief and firm. Outside the courtroom, wind pushed dry leaves against the courthouse steps. Reporters waited behind barriers, but Marco's family declined comment, and Brenda did too. She had spent enough hours turning warnings into words. The verdict had already said what needed saying. 2 weeks later, in a hearing room at the municipal building that smelled faintly of copier toner and coffee gone stale, the city contract board took up the project reinstatement file. Brenda sat at the witness table with Elena, a city engineer, and the new interim site manager, Carla Mendez, who wore mud on her boots and did not hide it. The board chair flipped through the corrective action binder. We need closure on every unresolved item before permit reactivation. Ms. Park? Elena read from the checklist. Physical evidence disposition. Original phone returned to Ms. Fletcher after forensic imaging. Certified copy lodged with court and regulator. Field notebook and delivery ticket scanned and archived. Originals released after trial. Penetrometer retained by company recalibrated and now requires dual signature checkout. Moisture tins and trowel, logged as non-evidentiary tools, returned to field kit. Laser receiver tested and recertified. Benchmark stakes from incident removed and replaced after geotech survey. Audio logs from dispatch and safety channels preserved under 7-year retention. Inspector conditional notice, closed with corrective submission accepted. Insurer reservation converted to partial denial, finalized in writing. Denied categories remain denied. The chair nodded. Loaded witness gaps? Elena glanced at Brenda, then back to the board. Mini loader operator who was observed avoiding engagement never provided a substantive statement despite 3 requests. This is documented as non-cooperation. No remaining witness threads are pending. Security response gap? Resolved. Dispatch reroute documented. Policy revised. Safety removal calls cannot supersede active hazard alerts without command review. The city engineer tapped the page. Distinctive pre-failure indicators all addressed in training? Carla answered. Yes. Crown cracking, piping seat points, toe sloughing, benchmark shift, and machine-induced vibration surcharge are now mandatory stop triggers. If anyone appears, entry halts. If 2 appear, corridor clears. At 11:03, the board voted. Permit reactivation approved with conditions. Third-party trench audits, unannounced inspections, and direct worker hotline access that bypassed site management. Not trust, verification. Spring rain tapped the trailer roof. The first morning Brenda walked the reopened south corridor with Carla and a new crew. The trench at Station 14+20 was now cut inside a properly rated box. Spoil piles measured back, excavator parked beyond offset, ladders tied and clean. Before anyone entered, Carla held up the soil log and said, "Readings." Brenda checked the entry. "Recorded and verified. Protective system. Installed and pinned. Water migration. Monitored, no active piping." Carla looked at the crew. "No one goes down on optimism. We go down on controls. If Brenda calls stop, it stops." Nobody laughed. Nobody rolled eyes. The silence was professional, and that was the healthiest sound Brenda had heard on that corridor. At lunch, Nate arrived on crutches for us modified duty orientation, still moving carefully but upright, helmet under one arm. He stopped beside Brenda near the tool trailer. "I kept the rehab schedule," he said, almost apologetic, as if survival needed explanation. "You did the hard part," she said. He looked toward the trench box, where 2 apprentices were checking strut pressure. "I'm taking the competent person class again, from scratch." "Good." He gave a small nod. "I should have listened the first time." "You listened when it mattered in court." Across the lane, Darnell raised a hand in greeting, then pointed at the painted setback line and called out to a laborer drifting too close with a pallet jack. "Back it up to the stripe. We don't crowd crowns here." The laborer corrected course immediately. By shift end, Brenda locked her field case in the truck and paused with her hand on the latch. Every item inside had a place again. Penetrometer, tins, trowel, spare batteries, notebook tabs. Tools, not memorials. On the dash sat a copy of the new trench card with red text across the bottom. "Authority to stop work is protected, not punishable." She drove out past the gate sign at low speed, tires humming over patched asphalt where rescue vehicles had once lined up. Tyler had bet a career, a bonus, and other people's bodies against basic soil mechanics. The court had named the cost in years and charges. The insurer had named it in exclusions, and the project ledger had named it in millions. Brenda named it the way she always had, with less drama and more truth. He thought speed outranked soil. Reality buried his timeline, his bonus, and his career.